talk about this streaming music service. Is Apple simply playing catch-up here? Can Apple do something really meaningful in streaming, or are they just trying to catch up to Pandora?
No, I mean, this is catch-up, and it's a bit embarrassing that this hadn't happened sooner. And the only thing, I'm assuming this is a bit of an innovator's dilemma problem, is that the people behind the iTunes business didn't want to see their business cannibalized by a streaming radio service, and at the same time Apple had some rights issues clearly with some of the rights holders on the music side. This should have been out, probably 2 years ago, maybe longer, depending on when you want to sort of peg it to in terms of their other acquisitions in this area. So it's catch-up, but can they do some things to be innovative? Sure. I mean, no one likes paying a subscription price for Spotify, and people don't like all the ads on the free version of Pandora, so run fewer ads and become more Spotify-like, and you've got something there. And so, there's room to do it. It's just not as profitable doing it that way, but my assumption is that's the way they have to, because it's the only way really to break into the market at this point.
And yet Apple, of course, has relationships with the labels dating back since the beginning of iTunes. Brian, what do you think? Is this embarrassing, or is there real potential for Apple to really innovate here and edge out some of the competitors?
I don't see a lot of potential for them on this iRadio side. I'm a Spotify user, and for me, iTunes and the idea of moving files around is archaic. That's something that people did 5 years ago. I think people now want access to all songs anywhere, and Spotify has about 20 million songs. What I think Apple needs to do is replicate that service, copy it. I don't think that the Pandora direction is the direction I would go in, and I don't actually think that they're going to be able to catch Pandora.
John, you recently spoke with the current CEO of Pandora, Joe Kennedy. How worried are they about this?
Well, their public front is, we're not worried about it. We've expected it. We've seen others do it, like Google. And by the way, we're not competing with the technology companies per se. We're going after the advertising radio market that exists today, all the traditional radio advertising players. Just to follow up on what Brian and Paul have been talking about, I think one of the things the developers who are here today are curious to know, if there is a music streaming service announcement, is how will they be able to take advantage of that? Is it going to be somewhat closed, or are they going to be able to take advantage of it, integrate it with the apps that they're creating too? I spoke to the chief technology officer of Shazam, which is a very popular app. If you hear a song and you click on their app, you can find out what that song is, and then all of a sudden you can go and buy the song. That's a very powerful system. Is there going to be more integration with some of the other apps that are tied to music, or just apps in general? I think if Apple goes down that road, it all of a sudden opens up a really interesting advertising window that maybe hasn't existed for Apple before.
It does, though, but only if people use it. Apple has tried a number of things before. They have this iTunes Match. Nobody uses it. What they need to do is they need to draw in users, and that's what's going to be critical here.
And to be fair, I mean, just to Brian's point, Brian, I mean, yeah, and Spotify is already, well down that path. It's not as if, sort of building on an application development community around a music platform is exactly novel at this point.
Right.
And so, yes, Apple can do it, but again, it's still playing catch-up.
But you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me, Emily, of Amazon and Yahoo going after eBay on the auction side. They lost that war. Pandora has first-mover advantage. If Apple's going to be successful, they've got to do something different than what we're seeing elsewhere.
All right, guys, and on that point, we're looking at video right now of Tim Cook speaking on stage earlier today. He's currently on stage right now talking about Safari, revealing the new look for Safari, and of course the Mac operating system. I want to talk about users and the pressure on Apple right now to reveal something incredible. Tim Cook recently at the D conference said that he believes that Apple does have more game changers in the pipeline. Paul, do you believe him?
I do, and I actually think that the problem that Apple's had, this is, you talked about at the top, this is the biggest window between major product launches in recent Apple history. My assumption is that there was supposed to be an Apple TV product in the spring of 2013. Something went awry. I don't know if it was a rights issue or a technical issue, and now it looks like, we'll see something maybe early 2014 at soonest. And that's really the problem here. There are some, potentially great products out there in the future, but they've gotten pushed out far for, reasons that are internal to Apple, and that's really what's hurting the company. And I don't expect we're going to see anything game-changing until we get out that far.
Brian, would you agree?
I think people are going to be impressed, I think, by what they see on the iPad side in the fall. I think if they can do a smaller iPad, with a smaller bezel, that could be, game-changing in some ways. But I do think...
Isn't that called the iPad Mini? I mean, didn't they already do that?
Well, that's a smaller screen and a smaller bezel. I'm referring to shrinking down the larger one. But the real game changer, Emily, is going to be is going to be the TV product, the large screen, 50-inch product on your wall, which I think is probably coming early next year. But there's been no evidence of it yet in the supply chain. So until we see that, it's really anybody's guess.
What about phones, though? I mean, isn't that's where they get most of their revenue. They get most of their revenue from the iPhone. Don't they need to innovate in phones?
They do, and we're going to get a sense for that today on the software side. I think the real opportunity there is maybe implementing something to do with a fingerprint reader. They bought a really interesting company last year called Authentic, a company out of Florida that does fingerprint sensors. We could actually see them make a big e-commerce move and an identity with a personal identity fingerprint swipe right on the handset. That could be something that we see later this year, coming from an acquisition from middle of last year.